today with you something that to me has been one of the most life-changing revelations that I've had in this walk with God as Father. I saw something, and suddenly the scriptures opened in a way I'd never seen, and it changed my whole perspective of what it meant for me to be a Christian and what it meant for me to walk in my life as a Christian. And I want to try to share this with you because for me, it's been one of the most transforming revelations that I've ever had. It's become, for us in Fatherheart Ministries, it's become, I think, probably what we would say is our flagship message or revelation. You know, for many years, Denise and I worked in rehabilitation ministry. And there was a particular, when we went through Bible school, the Bible school we went through had a rehabilitation ministry attached to it. And so every Bible school student also had someone on the rehabilitation ministry in their bedroom with them. So each student had a problem person in their room. And I can tell you, I could write books of some of the situations and some of the humorous, but some of the amazing stories and things that happened. Then we had 12 years in pastoral ministry, and Denise at that time, or just before that, had embarked on a ministry really in counseling in which she was in continuously for 25 years. And so she just was she particularly has had and still has today a great heart, particularly for those people who struggle with their sexuality. So all the homosexual community, every kind of aberration of sexuality, because, you know, we are all damaged sexual beings. You know, the first thing ever said about you was something to do with your sex. It's a boy, it's a girl. And so a very foundational issue in our life. And Denise has been very involved and she can sit and talk with people and just have compassion on them and help them day after day after day, all day. It just amazes me she's been able to do that. She just has a heart for people who struggle, can't get out of traps. But, you know, when you're involved in a lot of ministry with people, when you pastor a church, or when you're dealing with people's problems, sometimes after a period of time, those of you who have been in this kind of ministry, and it's probably many of you, you realize that just giving somebody a scripture is not enough. You know, just rolling off to them some biblical principle and telling them to just put that into action. As time goes on, you realize that is not enough. There's more to the issue. And you begin to really seek the Lord for answers for people, like real answers that change their living condition and situation. And we were in that for many, many years. And as we were struggling with this thing of answers for people, we came up with many, many answers. Some of them were even good. This revelation I want to share with you today, when I saw this, and it happened one day, when I saw it, I felt like for the first time in my life, I understood the basic problem of every human being in the world. I felt like I finally saw the root issue of our problems. Now, we could say it's sin, we could say it's lots of things, but I want to share with you what that is today as I see it now. Of course, it could come under that general heading. But when I saw this, I felt like I finally understood what the basic issue of every person, and no matter what their problem, what the basic issue is. I also felt that I understood for the first time what the problem that we have in churches is. You know, how church denominations will be against each other or struggle with each other or not be able to love each other or not even sometimes be kind to each other. One time I was in, Denise and I were in England, and somebody got a newspaper, and we saw this newspaper and just leafing through it, and it showed an article from another country. And in this other country, there had been two churches in the same town that had a evangelistic crusade on the same weekend. Two different denominations. After the crusade was over, an interviewer went to one of the churches and asked them how the crusade had gone in their church. And the pastor of this church answered, and his answer was this. He said, well, we didn't see anybody get saved, but thank God neither did the other church. it was in another country. You can understand why they put it in the newspaper, because such an incredible phenomena where churches would be grateful that they didn't get anybody saved. How incongruent, how ridiculous, how stupid. But see, it shows something of the difficulty that churches, denominations, leaders, people within churches and within their own relationships in leadership have differences. And when I saw this, I felt for the first time I understood the basic core issues of problems between churches. But also even the basic issue of problems between nations. You know, at that time when this was happening, there was still a lot of unrest in Ireland. There was a lot of unrest, as there still is in this area of the world. But in many parts of the world, nations have difficulty with their neighboring nations. Cultures have difficulty with other cultures. In Africa, the Hutus were fighting with the Tutsis, and, you know, cultural problems of relationships between people. And when I saw this, I felt like I finally understand what is the root issue of the problems of this world. And understanding that has been a huge help in so many ways, but it's changed the very way I live my life. Many, many different aspects of it. It's changed what I see myself to be as a Christian. And I want to read a particular verse to you from John chapter 14. If you'd like to come, or if you've got a Bible, you might like to look at it or look at it later. There's a very short verse in John 14, and I'm purposely not going to tell you for a moment which one it is, because I want to tell you what it meant to me when I read this particular verse one day back about 11, 12 years ago. When I was in Bible school, we studied the book of John very intently for a year. The lecturer that we had was a wonderful lecturer, and he took us through every verse, one verse at a time, to get through the book. We had 2 hours of lectures every day on the book of John for a year, with homework at night. And at the end of the year, he apologized profusely to us that we hadn't got through the whole book. We only got to chapter 16. But it had been a wonderful year. There were times when I remember coming out of that Bible school room to go and get coffee in the break, and I felt like I was floating across the lawn just in worship, because there was such a worshipful heart in this man as he lectured to us. He taught us that to memorize the book of John, to get to know your way around it, there's one word in each verse that is kind of like a key word or a key statement for that chapter. So each chapter he gave us a key word. For example, John 9 was blind man. And when you remember that in the chapter 9 talks about the blind man, you can bring the whole chapter comes back to your mind. And so chapter 11 is Lazarus, and it goes on like that. But he told us that the key verse to the whole book of John is in chapter 20, verse 31. And I just want to quote that verse to you, because that verse explains the whole book. If you read the book understanding what that verse is saying, then you know what you're looking for, what the purpose of the book is, because John tells us why he wrote it. If we understand why he wrote it, we can understand what he's trying to get at all the way through, what the point of the book is. And that verse says this. John writes, and he says, "These things are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that by believing you might have life in his name." It's not just that you would believe, but that you would get the life that's in his name. And he wrote the whole book that would be the effect of people who read it. And so when we read the book and understand that verse is the key verse that explains what the whole book is about, what it's for. Well, I understood that. But one day when I was reading this chapter 14, there's a verse here that as I read it, and it's like the Lord just shone an opening. He just opened it to my heart. I began to realize that this verse in John 14 is probably the key verse to the whole New Testament. In fact, I wonder if it's a key verse to the whole Bible. I used to read this verse and I thought, what an odd little verse. It's just a little verse in John 14. It's got a word in it in some versions that I didn't equate with anything else that was written in the chapter. And every time I would read it, it would just go through my mind, what an odd verse. I just thought, I don't know what that's talking about. It's an odd verse. And then in a split second one day, this odd little verse changed everything in my perspective. The verse is John 14, verse 18. It's so simple. Jesus is recorded. If you've got a Bible, it's got red letters for Jesus' words, which I have here. He says, I will not leave you orphans, I will come to you. Jesus said these words amongst many, many other words in the 3 to 3.5 years of his ministry. You can read through the recorded words of Jesus in a very short time